Hello, my name is Kelly. Welcome to the NICU Now audio support series. I am a NICU parent to Jackson, a micro-preemie born at 24 weeks, and Lauren, a late-term preemie born at 34 weeks. I am also the founder and executive director of Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit dedicated to providing education, resources, and peer-to-peer support to families that have experienced premature birth, the loss of a baby, or have a child with a special healthcare need. Hand to Hold's NICU Now audio support series was developed to help NICU parents navigate their NICU journey. Today's topic is life transformations after the NICU. Many people have strong reactions to and opinions about being told that everything happens for a reason. I recently read an article that equated these words to nothing less than emotional, spiritual, and psychological violence. I know while my son was clinging to life in the NICU, I would not have wanted anyone to tell me his early birth held deeper philosophical meaning that would make me a better person. But I also can't deny the fact that 16 years later, my life has been transformed in ways I could never have imagined. If I had the ability to choose whether or not my son would have a NICU stay, I would certainly never choose to relive those 4 grueling months, knowing how much he suffered and how much he has struggled physically and developmentally through the years. Yet, with the support of my husband, family, community, and amazing therapist, I was able to grow from the experience. I found out I was so much stronger than I ever believed. My life is so much more meaningful. Parenting and marriage are so much sweeter. My friendships are deeper and my faith stronger than before I knew what the acronym NICU stood for. And there is no question that my son is a more empathetic person who knows his life has meaning and purpose because of what he went through. Joining me today is the licensed family and marriage therapist, Kara Wallen. She is also the creator of NICUhealing.com, and I am so excited to welcome you back.
Hi, Kelly. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for being here, Kara. I really like this topic. I like that we are going to focus on some positive things that can come out of a NICU stay. There's been a lot of talk and articles written about post-traumatic growth. It's often reported for cancer survivors, trauma victims, people with spinal cord injuries. And recently, there's been more discussion about post-traumatic growth occurring for children and families after a serious illness of a child. So it should be noted, though, that post-traumatic growth does not typically happen for many years. So if you're in the NICU now, if you're just recently coming out of the NICU, you're still going through the trauma, processing the trauma. But we're talking about many years later.
Not to be interpreted as another form of stress.
Right. It's not for you to think that your life has been transformed overnight, right?
Sure.
In a positive way.
But I do have to say, I have a study sitting right in front of me here. It's called Personal Growth in the Wake of Stress, the Case of Mothers of Preterm Twins. And so one of the findings that they found in this study was that 60% of mothers whose newborns were treated in a neonatal intensive care unit reported some perceived benefits afterward. Now, this is not to say that in terms of something like post-traumatic growth, that, something terrible happens and then all of a sudden Pollyanna comes and uses a magic wand and we see everything as wonderful and we become super strong. I think that anyone who survived any kind of trauma would happily trade the trauma for not having had trauma, any kind of growth that they get from the trauma for not having had the trauma. However, there's some evidence that suggests that it occurs more often than PTSD does, in that people are kind of uncovering parts about themselves that they didn't realize they had, strengths they had, resiliencies, values, beliefs, things that they're willing to take a stand for. And I think that any parent who's been through the NICU can agree that they didn't realize they were as strong as they were. Many times we surprise ourselves just with our abilities to do that. Does that experience resonate with you and your family, would you say?
Absolutely. But I definitely think it wasn't right away.
Yeah.
I wasn't seeing it right away. Now, my husband said he knew from the minute, and I think he's exaggerating, but he said he knew from the minute that I became the mom of a preterm baby that I would create an organization, that I would become an advocate. He foresaw that in our future, just knowing my personality. I didn't see it. I couldn't see parenting a medically fragile child. I couldn't see what my life was going to look like long term. This was not my plan, and I really couldn't see how I would be able to transform this into any semblance of good. All I really thought about was the challenges my son faced and how I was going to help him become everything he needed to become.
Sure. And I think, one thing that I think you're speaking to, which tell me if I'm wrong, but sometimes when we are in the midst of the NICU, a lot of the time the feedback we get from friends and family is how strong we are, how amazing we are. And sometimes that's not necessarily what we want to hear because it's what we have to do to get through our day to day. So getting up in the morning, showing up to the NICU, pumping, doing the things that we have to do to be able to make ends meet in terms of life and death, essentially. It's not necessarily what we want to hear in those moments, but it is something that we can look at down the road in terms of figuring out, how am I going to take this memory with me? How are we going to make meaning out of what this experience was for our family?
The article that I was referencing, talking about that Tim Lawrence, I mentioned him to you before. He is an incredible blogger who writes about grief frequently. I will say he is gritty. He's uncensored. He says himself he's a take no prisoners blogger, and talking about navigating life's difficulties of grief, injury, depression, or loss. But he's pretty powerful. And he's the one who said he equated everything happens for a reason to emotional, spiritual, and psychological violence.
Sure.
I mean, he really thinks you should disassociate yourself with anyone who says that to you. Now, my argument is, I think it is possible. I think they're coming from a good place and they mean well, but they don't know what to say and they're trying to be encouraging. I see what he's saying about the damage that can cause us at the time. But I think what he argues in this fantastic article is by saying that, we don't allow people to grieve.
Yep.
And so he is talking about how our culture has treated grief as this problem to be solved. And you mentioned that earlier in another podcast when we were talking about bereavement and our culture around grief and loss. And, he's saying that it's not a problem to be solved. An illness is to be healed, or both. He argues that it's the process. We've done everything we can to avoid, ignore, or transform grief. And so rather than surrounding ourselves with people, we're being surrounded by platitudes. So a very powerful argument. I think that he's right. Especially in a world of Facebook, we can send off these beautiful
the quotes,
right?
Yeah.
And I'm praying for you, and I'm thinking about,
I kind of I want to write an essay about quotes and like the meaning they make in social media, because it's just so fascinating to me, the prevalence of them all over the Facebook,
or even just scriptures. And I am a spiritual person.
Sure.
I'm a religious person.
Absolutely.
And prayer is very, very important to me. But I think even more important are, the friends who just show up, the people who sit with us and let us grieve and don't expect us to get over it and on with it and past it right away, and understand that that is a process. So what I am saying is, I do think that these really traumatic, worst days of our lives, worst months experiences can be transformational.
Absolutely.
But we first have to go through the work. We have to do the grief, right? We have to go through this very difficult, dark period. And your study shows, and a paper that I have in front of me show that it is more common than not. A fabulous article just recently came out written by neonatologists. They are all medical healthcare providers who have all had their own NICU stay, either for their child or their grandchildren. Instead of talking about post-traumatic growth, because they said they didn't grow from the experience, but rather they became stronger and more vulnerable at the same time. But they believe it can lead to life transformation. So instead of calling it post-traumatic growth, they look at it as life transformations. I just thought that was very profound, and they go on to list lots of life lessons that they experienced. So I just wanted to name some of those. They talked about gratitude for the gift of life, forgiveness, learning not to sweat the small stuff, respecting the fact that some things are simply out of our control. That's a hard one. Humility and resilience. So we can pick any of those and talk about those. But, before we get to that point where we can say, oh, yeah, I no longer sweat the small stuff. I mean, we have to get through these really difficult experiences in the NICU and those first few years after the NICU, and we are dealing with follow-up appointments and diagnosis and all the challenges that we have. But I do believe it can lead to great things. I mean, just look at you and starting NICU Healing and all the families that you have helped. You know, look at Kira Sorrells, who we talked about in another podcast. You know, her experience of triplets in the NICU and losing one of her triplets led to her founding the Preemie Parent Alliance and the work that that organization does. But it could be on a much smaller scale. It could be almost anything of life transformations of really what's important to you in your life. Maybe you decide that the job that you're in is not the job that you want. And I think it takes many different forms.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think one of the things that became really apparent through our own personal experience in my family, it was just that idea that the little things, they start to present themselves as being little. You know, I remember one of the first things I did when I went into preterm labor was to shut down all of my social media accounts, all of them. And
when did you do that?
I did it as soon as I was taken in the hospital.
Really?
Yep.
Because that's kind of the opposite reaction. Most people use it to put information out and communicate. Why did you do that?
I did it because I couldn't deal with the idea of being able to communicate things on that level anymore. You know, it was just, I had always been one of these people that really liked things that were absurd. You know, absurdity was really funny to me. But imagining having a life where I could hold both that and my babies being on life support wasn't fathomable. It wasn't fathomable to me. I ended up shutting him down for almost 4 years, I think. Because I couldn't imagine communicating in that way. And it was cool because it gave me this space to be able to reconsider the way that human relationships work and how I'd let things get. And it also kind of gave me the sense of, you know, who were the people that were still standing beside me, even when there wasn't this easily way of accessing my story or what was going on for me. Who were the people that reached out? Not to say that that was an intentional thing or some kind of a test or something like that, but you really realize where you stood. Other things too. It just like the little stuff of life just kind of fell away. I feel like that was sort of the first thing that became apparent to me. And it was liberating. And then you started to realize, you know, what is it that's making me still get up every day? What is it that's making me show up at the NICU, even if it's painful, even if it feels like it's hopeless, even if it feels like we might never get home? A great quote by Zen Buddhist author Pema Chodron, and I'm paraphrasing here, so it's not a direct quote, but she says something like, "Only by facing annihilation over and over again do we find the parts of ourselves that are indestructible." So I agree with what you were talking about, the doctor speaking to, which is that it's not necessarily a growth. It's like a realization that there's something about you that's a lot tougher than what you ever acknowledged to have. And for my personal experience, it was the love for my babies, you know? And I think for a lot of NICU parents, you know, due to the circumstance too, it really highlights that. And
They talked about a rebuilding, and they said that, you know, really their challenges and their losses destroyed who they were, and they were rebuilt and transformed.
Sure.
So I thought that was really powerful.
I can't think of her name. There's another great author that talks about that in terms of trauma, you come through it and you're a different person at the end, but there's a little bit of a value in that because you can choose how you want to reconstruct yourself given the knowledge that you've gained from it.
Well, they went on to talk about deciding with the heart. We talked about that in one of our podcasts about from being empowered to make decisions. And oftentimes we're making decisions from our heart rather than, from a place of medical knowledge. But they talk about knowing that vulnerability and emotions are sources of strength. So they gain this new appreciation for uncertainty. And they talked about, like you said, learning that we're stronger than we think. It's possible to see our hopes, dreams, and plans totally destroyed and then to rewrite our story with a new plot line.
Sure. Beautiful. That's a beautiful way of saying it. Yeah. Do you feel that way? I mean, how do you feel like your process? I'm just curious because I always love to hear, this is one of my favorite things is to hear these stories from parents that have gone through the NICU because a lot of the time it's just so beautiful. But you know, you don't have to speak to it. But I'm just
No,
curious.
I think that I think I'm so much stronger and so much more. I don't know. I'm embarrassed to say. I think I'm smarter than I gave myself credit for. I really do. I think I never thought that I would be running a national nonprofit.
Yeah.
I never thought
doing
that
an amazing job at it. I might add.
I never thought I'd be speaking on, keynote speaking about post-traumatic stress disorder and depression. I never thought that I could be this vulnerable. Something that I used to be very ashamed of was how easily I cried. I'm a very sensitive and empathetic person. But I didn't realize that that's actually a strength. There are people who are not able to be empathetic and relate to others. And so that that actually is a blessing and a strength in doing the work that I do, because I really do understand and feel for the people that are now going through the NICU experience. So I think some of the things that I thought were my weaknesses, I've ended up understanding are my strengths, and I'm much more capable than I ever thought. I spoke to my marriage. I think, I've seen so many marriages not make it through the NICU stay and the years after, and I have to say I have a new appreciation for the strength of my marriage. I really look at any of the challenges that we go through now compared to what we've already been through fairly early in our marriage, and going through that NICU stay and the challenges that followed, how that strengthened my marriage. So really appreciating him and his strength through that, and the kind of father that he is and has been, and his support of building hand to hold and us doing this together.
I think any partnership that makes it through the NICU is kind of a warrior partnership. And I don't know how better to describe it, but it's, it takes a pair of warriors to be able to get through something like that together. And people that really have a dedication to each other, because it rips people apart. Trauma rips people apart, and that's not something that's a personality-based thing. That's a basis of going through trauma.
Well, I also will say it took a lot of therapy. I mean, he and I have both embraced therapy, and I think it's so important for couples not to dismiss that,
right,
and to understand how important that is. So I think just important for us to look at the possibilities and inspiring parents that are in the midst of a NICU stay right now, our recent graduates. Again, no pressure that you're supposed to feel this magnificent life transformation now, but knowing that it is possible later. But to get there, you must first go through the grief during that traumatic time. Kara, I want to thank you for joining us to talk today about life transformations. And I want to congratulate you on yours. I mean, a NICU mom, 26-week twins, traumatic loss, and what you've done to use that to help other families, and through NICU healing and through all of your work with NICU families. So happy for you. I think that you honor William and Elliot in all your work.
Oh, thank you so much, Kelly. That really means a lot, especially coming from someone else who's been through the thick of it. It means a lot. And I think that the work that you're doing is incredible, and that your journey has been just as much of a challenge as mine. So it's very cool to convene on this subject with somebody who has such an intimate knowledge of it.
Well, hopefully through our podcast series, families will find hope and inspiration, know that they're not alone, and seek out the support that they need. The realization of our own strength and resilience will lead to life transformations that allow the world to make sense again, and for us to rebuild ourselves and write a new story. But first, we must grieve what has been lost. In order for NICU babies to thrive after discharge, they need smart, informed parents who understand their needs and are emotionally and physically capable of caring for a medically fragile child. Peer-to-peer support is an effective tool for helping parents navigate their NICU stay and the years that follow. Support from a caring and informed NICU graduate parent helps a new family feel more capable, confident, and ready to face the journey ahead. To request support, volunteer, or donate, please visit our website at handtohold.org. Our quote to remember today is from the Greek philosopher Achilles. Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until, in our despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. Thank you for listening.
Mhm.